Out of every encounter in every raid in the game, Verity has quickly become infamous for its convoluted puzzle mechanics and difficulty. Starting with the day 1 raid, it took teams well over 10 hours to complete this encounter. Even in regular difficulty clears, this encounter could take a few hours to teach and often longer to actually complete. There is a lot that makes Verity such a challenging encounter. Not only are there a number of different mechanics requiring all players to participate, but there are also a number of different ways to complete it. With so much going on, it's no wonder that even the devs that worked on the encounter didn't fully know how it worked. Today, we'll be taking a deep dive into the absolutely diabolical design of Verity. So buckle up, it's time to learn your shapes. Hey everyone, I'm Rizeki and welcome to my design analysis of the Verity encounter from Salvation's Edge in Destiny 2. As always, thanks for checking out the video. If you're new here and like this kind of analysis, don't forget to let me know by subscribing to the channel and leaving a like on the video. I do weekly design videos and I'd love to have you around for them. But alright, enough stalling, let's talk about Verity. For previous raid encounter videos, I've done an overview of all the mechanics before talking about the design. This time though, I'm just going to give a brief explanation because this encounter is so complex. Don't worry though, I'll be talking about literally everything as we go, so by the end you'll be an expert in the encounter anyway. In short, Verity requires you to match shapes. At the beginning of a phase, half the team will be teleported into solo rooms, with everyone else in the starting room. The goal is to get everyone out of the solo rooms. This is done by matching shapes, both in solo or inside rooms, and the starting or outside room. Correctly matching shapes will let everyone out. We'll get into the details of shape matching in a bit. The other major part is a death mechanic. Halfway through shape matching, solo players will die, dropping their ghosts in the outside room. Outside players could pick these ghosts up, returning them to the statues near the rally banner to revive the inside players. Reviving just requires you to match the ghosts to the correct statue of their owning player. This death mechanic will occur a second time after all inside players have been freed, with the only change being all players except one will die this time. Correctly reviving all players will progress the encounter to the next phase. Complete it 3 times and you're done. And that's the high level explanation of Verity, but there's a lot more to it. Verity is different from many other encounters in the game. Most encounters in raids are either a boss fight like Herald of Finality, or an objective based encounter like Substratum or the Repository. It's very rare to see a puzzle encounter like Verity. Really, the only other notable example is the Vault encounter in Last Wish, which in its own right is infamous. Designing a puzzle encounter is kind of like walking a tightrope. On one hand, the puzzle solution could be too easy. This would make solving the encounter boring and would lead to almost no replayability value. On the other hand, you could maximize the difficulty of the solution, making it much more interesting to solve, increasing its replayability value, but also possibly adding frustration to players. The other challenge with puzzle design is the act of actually doing the designing. Where do you start? How do you actually come up with the puzzle? So this is where we're going to start. Of course, I'm not in the walls over at Bungie HQ, but I can make some educated guesses on the process of creating the Verity puzzle. At the very top level, Verity seems to be an encounter based around the idea of the process of the witness going through to enact the final shape. It makes sense that the Guardians would have to interact with shaping their destiny in order to make it to the witness. So we now know that our main mechanic needs to revolve around shapes and reshaping something. We also probably want our mechanics to have some sort of tie-in to previous and future encounters in the raid. Up until this point, players have already been exposed to 3 types of shapes: triangles, circles, and squares. Given all that, we now have the base components for the puzzle. Once we have our core puzzle pieces, we need to figure out the goal of the encounter. What are we actually trying to do? In this case, I think the idea is that the witness has trapped us in a particular shape, preventing us from reaching them. Logically, this would mean that we have to reshape ourselves to break out and make it to them. There's a couple key concepts here: breaking out and reshaping ourselves. This gives us our goal, breaking out, and the process of achieving that, reshaping ourselves. With that, we have everything we need to begin creating the encounter. We could take the idea of breaking out and applying that not just to the overall goal of the encounter, but also to the goal of each individual phase. This is where the inside rooms probably came from. Some players are stuck inside the prison of their own shape, and everyone else needs to work together to reshape that prison into something else. But how do we design a mechanic that allows players to do this? The only pieces left are, well, of course, the 3 types of shapes. So how do we take those shapes and convert them into a key of sorts that lets everyone escape? We don't want the puzzle to solve itself, and we probably want to give both groups of players a slightly different task based on which type of room they find themselves in. Maybe the outside players can reveal the lock, with the inside players creating the key. At this point, the idea is that we want to interact with these shapes in some way to create a lock and key in order to open the door and let everyone out. We can't just give the players the answer, so there does need to be some sort of twist. Twists are what make puzzles puzzles. Without something to solve, well, there's no puzzle. In Verity, the first wrinkle comes from the separation of information. The inside and outside teams have an information barrier that needs to be crossed somehow. But the other information wrinkle comes from the further separation of the inside players. Each inside player was made to be solo in their own room, but they still need to communicate with each of their fellow inside teammates while at the same time providing information to the outside team. The only information that could logically make sense to communicate had to be something with the basic shapes. Remember, these are the building blocks of Verity. This first information layer manifested as the held shape in the hands of the inside statues. Each statue holds a unique shape only visible to the inside players. This information makes for the required information for the outside players. Without knowing this, the outside players won't be able to reveal the locks. With the inside to outside information covered, we need something to communicate between inside players. Inside each room, there is yet another information obfuscation layer. Each solo player sees a handful of shapes shifting on their wall. You need to know which statue is holding which shape, as well as knowing which players have which shapes available on their wall. This is really the meat of the Verity puzzle. Inside players need to find some way to transfer shapes between each other to correctly sort them based on the statue's held shape. Whew. This section of Verity is not only challenging because of the obfuscation of information, but also because of the sheer number of ways you can solve it. There are two ways to correctly create a key to escape. One is to have two shapes on your wall that differ from that of your statue's held shape. This is the typical solution. The other way is to gain two copies of the same shape on your wall that also differ from your statue's shape. First step is to make sure every player is in agreement on the final solution that you're aiming for. Like I said, usually this will be the differing shapes unless you're doing the challenge triumph. But even after this, you now need to come up with a method to efficiently transfer shapes between players. You could do this the chaos method, where you just shift things around until it happens to work out, but this could cause a communication mess. I would venture a guess and say that this is probably how day one ended up being solved. It's pretty inefficient and can cause a number of communication problems. Players have found a number of methods for solving this encounter with minimal trades, but again, there's not just a single way to do it. Each group is different, and I've probably had to solve this encounter 2 or 3 different ways based on whatever fire team I'm in. If you're on a different wavelength from your team, it can be difficult to figure out what is going wrong in the trades, and it could lead to a breakdown of communication and confusion. To be successful on the inside, you need all players to be in agreement on the solution, as well as the process for reaching that solution before even starting the encounter. And that's just the inside team. The other part of the puzzle is revealing the lock, the goal of the outside team. This is where things start to really bend people's minds, and probably is the same reason that this team is kept as a group of 3. If you're outside, these statues are not holding a 2D shape, but rather a 3D shape. These are the locks that you need to reveal. These 3D shapes need to be correctly reshaped to match the key being created by the inside players. The shape information given by the inside players at the beginning of the phase is the legend for determining which 3D shapes need to be held by each statue. The mind twister here is how 2D shapes interact with 3D shapes. Simply, each 3D shape is just a combination of two 2D shapes. For example, a sphere is a circle and a circle. A cylinder is a circle and a square. It's fairly intuitive once you understand the relationships between the shapes, but it's very hard to understand at first. Side note, if you are having trouble remembering the combinations, you could think of it as the top and side views of the objects, and that will match the shapes that they're made of. For example, a cylinder, the side view is a rectangle, but if you look at it from the top, it's a circle. Anyway, the mechanic on the outside is similar to that of the inside, but requires you to know every shape combination. Essentially, you're trading 2D shapes between each statue to create new 3D shapes. There's really no best system as far as I know for dissecting shapes, so as long as the dissecting players understand how trading works, it should work out fine. Dissection is fairly difficult to wrap your head around, which is again why it makes sense to provide 3 players with the option to do it. The shape trading, both inside and outside, is the most important component for why Verity is so complex, or at the very least hard to understand. The concepts of trading is the same for both the inside and the outside players, but the system for correctly trading and how the end results look is very different. It's deceptive. You could be comfortable with being an inside player, but if you're thrown outside, you might feel very lost, even if the general idea is the same. The least impactful encounter mechanic is probably the ghost death mechanic. It's not a very difficult part of the encounter, despite requiring the communication of, again, obfuscated information between the dead and alive players. I think what this part really does, especially during the shaping phase, is twofold. For one, it interrupts all players mid-trading. This can easily knock off your flow and could add a layer of confusion when returning to life. It's kind of like a mental reset in a puzzle where you can't really afford to reset your thoughts. It's also a urgent time challenge. Like every other Salvation's Edge encounter, you have a wipe timer. The death mechanic steals valuable time away from all players. If you're too slow to react to the deaths, you will be very short on time that's required to actually complete the shape trading phase. Oh, and also pretty big is how the quote-unquote dying could falsely make teams believe they did a mechanic wrong, even when they haven't. It's a red herring that could really mess with players who are unfamiliar with the encounter. Death is usually bad, but not in this case. The final key piece that makes Verity truly devious is the random nature of role assignment. Pretty much every other encounter in the game lets players choose their preferred role. Even Vault lets you choose what you want to do, whether that's mechanics or ad clear. Verity will randomly select players for the solo rooms, and it will randomly select the living player in the final death mechanic. Every player is essentially forced to play whatever role is given to them, meaning everyone needs to understand all of the mechanics. Sure, you could be lucky and be placed on ad clear in the outside room 3 times, but that's highly unlikely. For blind teams like the day one, this could really make it difficult to get a grasp of what is actually going on in the encounter if you're constantly being placed on different roles all of the time. Verity is so well designed. It definitely accomplished what it set out to do. Create a puzzle that stumps even the devs themselves. What makes me appreciate this encounter even more is the almost zen, flow-like feel that this encounter has on subsequent runs. Once everyone knows how to solve it, it's pretty much a breeze and is really fun to run. You learn to appreciate every role in the encounter, and you are rewarded for your mastery over the mechanics as a team. It's an encounter that requires patience, understanding, and mastery, all of which makes it all the more engaging to solve and complete. The sheer number of solutions means that no 2 teams need to play it the same, and that's honestly something really special. As long as you get to the solution, you're set. Everything from the theme of the encounter, to the choice of mechanics, to the team play, even to the red herrings is excellently designed, and I hope we see more of this in the future, even if future day ones end up also taking twice as long because of it. So, what do you think? Have you played Verity yourself? Or are you still having trouble wrapping your mind around the mechanics? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below or over in our Discord server. And if you like this kind of analysis and want to see more, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like on the video. There's more weekly Destiny 2 design videos and more coming out, and you won't want to miss them. But with all that said, I think that's all I've got for now. As always, I've been Rizeki, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.